And to discuss this further, I'm joined in the studio by Asaf, Ronel. He's the World News editor for Haaretz, and by Abdullah Maruf, who is a lecturer at Istanbul's Yermi, Dokus, Mayis University. Thank you so much for both of you for being here. Let's begin with you, Asaf. I guess it's a simple question, but why is it that the Israeli authorities and the occupation targets young activists and detains them and charges them with stone pelting, for example?
So many young Palestinians were confronted Israeli soldiers on their lands, in their towns, in their villages, and were violently met a violent response by the Israeli soldiers. Ahed Tamimi's case is unique because, first of all, it was in front of the cameras, and then, second of all, the Israeli soldiers didn't respond in the first point. And the video of Ahed standing on her land, kicking and slapping Israeli soldiers and actually pushing them away from her land and gaining a victory became a focal point for Israeli public who felt like they lost. And then the response was, if you're looking at the Israeli public response to what happened on the first incident, once it was filmed, you had the spectrum moved between how brave were our soldiers who didn't respond to the provocation.
So let's put it in a broader term. Was it more of a slight because the soldiers didn't respond?
Yes, exactly.
For the Israeli public?
Yes. Many responses were they should have beaten her up. They should have responded. They shouldn't have retreated. This is like one part of society. The other was they were so brave, they didn't respond, they didn't fall into the Palestinian provocation. They were not inside the Israeli public, at least if you don't consider the radical left, or at least the fringes of the Zionist left. Most of them didn't think about what Ahed Tamimi was doing as something that is right, that a young woman, a teenager, was standing outside her house. Two fully armed men were standing in front of her and blocking the way to her house, and she pushed them away.
Let's try to broaden it up, pull it out a bit. Ahed Tamimi isn't the only case. We've had instances, in fact, 8,000 Palestinian minors have been detained since 2000. Up to 700 Palestinian minors are detained every year. Majority of the detained minors are charged with throwing or pelting stones. 3 out of 4 minors are physically abused during detention, and only 10% have an access or have had an access to a lawyer. Tell us the Palestinian perspective.
Ahed Tamimi was not and is not the only child who was abused by the Israeli court system today. For example, no one of the Palestinian side forgets what happened to Mohammed Abu Khtair in 2014, who was burned alive, who was 16 years old. And no one as well forgets about Ahmed Manasra, who was charged was sentenced to 12 years in prison, who was 13 years old when he was run out by an Israeli soldier in Jerusalem.
UNICEF released a report in 2012 and concludes that the ill treatment of children who come in contact with the military detention system appears to be widespread, systematic, and institutionalized throughout the process. Is it institutionalized to that extent?
No doubt. There is. The bureaucracy of the detention of Palestinians is blind. There was a quite shocking case last week. It was discovered last week. A few weeks ago, a young Palestinian girl, 14 years old, was arrested on a bus in Jerusalem because she was begging for money. The officers took her to detention. Her uncle paid the bail. They decided to keep her for the night in jail, and then they put her on a car and they drove her to Gaza.
So it's a question of an unequal or power.
It's not only that, actually. It's institutionalized more than that. My personal child, my child, was born in Jerusalem, yet he doesn't have an ID and he cannot go to Jerusalem today. Why? Because at the moment when he was born, I was in Mecca doing pilgrimage. So the Israeli Ministry of Interior refused to give him citizenship. Why? Because only his mother was at that point. That means legally, according to the Israelis, legally, if I was in Ramallah, if I was in Bethlehem, it would have been the same case.
And it's not
So
just
it's
not just
institutionalized,
about it's not
actually.
just about the occupation. There are different levels of the occupation. For
Yes.
example, people in Jerusalem have a different ID as opposed to people in the West Bank or elsewhere in the occupied territories. So it's quite unequal. I want to bring this back to reaction from the Israeli society, and I want to highlight Israeli poet and songwriter Yehonatan Geffen, who compared Ahed Tamimi to Anne Frank, another symbol of the Jewish experience, and he later had to apologize for it. My question to you is, why is it so hard for Israelis to accept comparisons, however controversial, between the suffering of Palestinian youth and that of Jewish youth during the Holocaust?
I think that the comparison to the Holocaust for almost all Israelis is a taboo, which you don't compare things to the Holocaust because it was a unique experience. In the Israeli discourse of the conflict with the Palestinians, the Israelis keep blaming the Palestinians of using their weakness as a weapon. As the younger you are, the weaker you are, then your weapon is more powerful. The Ahed Tamimi case is considered by most Israelis as a deliberate provocation to hurt the Israelis. No matter the fact that sending the army in the middle of the night to arrest her hurt the Israelis around the world much more than the first video, because it only proved what was seen in the first video, that the Israelis are using violence against young women, young teenagers, even though I must say the PR event of arresting Ahed Tamimi in the middle of the night was unique. They sent women soldiers to arrest her. Usually when they are breaking into houses of Palestinians in the middle of the night to arrest teenagers, they don't bother with male, female, but this time, because they knew they will get focused, that they wanted to see that the occupation is humane, so they sent women soldiers so that it would look better. Someone thought it might look better.
Abdullah, I'll give you the last word.
The issue of arresting the youth in Palestine, it's not the only problem that the youth are suffering actually under the occupation. There is no humane occupation and inhumane occupation. All occupation is inhumane. The Israelis should ask themselves, and the world should ask itself, why the youth are being oppressed in their land and oppressed in every day of their life. The youth in Palestine do have a lot of problems in their education system. They have a lot of problem in their everyday life. They have a lot of problems of drugs, actually. In Jerusalem itself, almost half a kilogram in the eastern side of Jerusalem being distributed amongst the youth of drugs every day. So we're speaking about a whole life being oppressed in their whole life. So an occupation is an occupation. It's always unaccepted and always illegal.
Abdullah, Maruf, Asaf, Ronel, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.